In 2019, I testified before Congress exposing events that revealed the profound folly of U.S. foreign policy towards Russia. President Trump pressured Ukraine, igniting the Ukraine scandal and emboldening Russian aggression. But while you might remember that pivotal moment, you might not realize that our failings on Russia didn't begin with Trump. They were decades in the making. I've seen these failures firsthand, serving on the National Security Council, at the Pentagon, and in Russia and Ukraine. Time and again, I've witnessed U.S. leaders from both parties prioritize fleeting gains over lasting security. Policies that paved the way for today's crisis. Russia's war in Ukraine, the most dangerous geopolitical conflict of our time. Now, after 30 years of flawed decision-making across 6 presidencies, we stand at a crossroads. Will we learn from our folly, or will we double down on the same reactive, short-sighted approach, potentially escalating the Russia-Ukraine war and other crises into major confrontations? It is essential that the U.S. move beyond failed assumptions towards a principled foreign policy. This isn't just about understanding past mistakes. It's about fighting for a future where American leadership prioritizes values and long-term security over transactional power plays. A future of moral leadership and greater security.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. My guest today is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman, whose testimony before Congress in 2019 about Trump's attempt to extort the president of Ukraine led to the first impeachment. Alex has just released a new book, The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. Alex, this book goes deep into the history of America's mismanagement and naivete when it came to dealing with Russian leaders, not just Putin, but all the way back. I definitely want to dive into that, but I have to get your reaction to the past couple of weeks and the state of affairs between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia, because it's not great.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, thanks for having me on again. Always look forward to these conversations. You know, I start with the domestic front because they're all kind of tied in together. I think, you know, our country is taking a beating right now, whether the general public sees it or not. They haven't really felt it in the way that matters in their pocketbooks. I mean, certainly they see the price of eggs is skyrocketed. Things are not going down, but it's not translated. And so far, Trump is still in some sort of honeymoon period. I think that's maybe wearing thinner quicker than we've seen historically, just because of the overreach and you know, the way that the kingmaker Elon Trump is operating, just breaking a lot of things. So I'm very concerned about our country right now. Deeply concerned about the attacks on different institutions, people being targeted. Yesterday, I don't know, actually, just recently, we've had a slew of hacks, partisan hacks, be approved. Kash Patel recently for the director of the FBI, and that'll be the minister of retribution, as the writings on the wall. On the foreign policy front, these are probably more lasting, in certain regards, more lasting effects and damage. The U.S. is losing its relationships with allies. We are now perceived as completely unreliable. And we'll see a situation in which the Europeans go it alone. I think other democracies look for alternatives. You know, Taiwan can't be secure in our relationship. Ukraine is being thrown under the bus in an effort to appease Putin. To what end? We'll get into that in a minute. It's not clear, frankly, why Trump wants to give Putin a win. You'd imagine if he was more of a thoughtful, sophisticated actor, he'd want to give himself a win. He does want to give himself a win, but the way he's going about it is actually not going to help the U.S. at all. Not secure itself, not get any better deals. So it is pretty harmful. I think you see an erosion of collective defense with NATO, the most important alliance we have. It is the bulwark for any type of real crisis the U.S. might face. We would come in as a strong team as opposed to a country by itself. And more importantly, it's weakening our financial relationships with Europe, our most important trading partner. If we lose stability in that market, there's a shock to the European market. It is going to have ripple effects to the U.S. We will then go into some sort of recession if we see Russian further aggression. So all in all, a really, really horrible turn of events. But what's shocking about Trump's approach here is that he's really doubling down on the worst mistakes. This is what the book talks about, the worst mistakes that we've made over the past 35 years, putting Russia first, forgetting about our alliances, forgetting about the other important players, our partnerships. The way that you secure the United States is not always bending the knee, appeasing an adversary. The research and the data is absolutely clear. This is the shocking part. This is somewhat hard for folks to understand. Russia's a nuclear power. We want to avoid crises. But the way we do that is through resolute actions in support of our national security interests, support to our alliances, support to Ukraine, not the other way around. It's basically the fact that we've catered to Russia because of hopes and fears that we ended up in this situation where Russia chose the path of military aggression. So whereas Trump is thinking, okay, this might not be worth it. We don't want a confrontation with Russia. It's got all sorts of resources. We want to play nice with them. That actually makes Russia more aggressive. Russia will bank that and go further. Instead of doing what we should be doing, which is the lesson I communicate in the book, we need to be absolutely crystal clear on what are the lines that cannot be crossed. That's NATO, that is European security, that is military aggression against neighbors that destabilizes vital U.S. national security interests, and make sure that our adversaries understand that so they don't cross those lines without severe repercussions. That is the way we provide security for the United States.
Your book goes deep into the history of American appeasement from Minsk to 2014. But I want to dwell on the alliance part for just a second, because I don't think most Americans realize that is America's true strength. Sure, we have the most powerful military in the history of the world, but our real strength lies in our friendships and our alliances. And Trump is either completely ignorant of that or willfully shredding that. And you write about this in your latest Substack. When you betray that trust, America really suffers. I'm thinking about your piece about the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard as DNI, where you wrote about intelligence sharing, which is where we get most of the good stuff, right? We don't have the agents we need inside, the Kremlin, but Estonia might, right? Intelligence sharing is where the good stuff comes from. And you wrote that intelligence sharing allows the U.S. to counter threats posed by terrorists and adversarial states. With Gabbard as the head of DNI, Americans will be facing a more dangerous world with fewer friends and less tools. I don't understand how Republicans don't see this clear as day, especially the hawkish ones. This used to be the National Security Party.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder if part of this is, Trump has got the largest ego. He's a narcissist, but some of that he conflates, it's all him. It's all him all the time. But some of that he probably conflates with the American power and American exceptionalism. And I also believe in American exceptionalism, but I believe that one of the reasons that we're exceptional is because of the alliances that we built over decades, and that the U.S. is less exceptional if we go it alone. It cannot be an island. From the basic things, like the reason that we could be so effective around the globe, maybe the Europeans don't have the military industrial base that we have. They might have some exquisite systems, but some of the things that has been in the press is this long-range missile called a Taurus. Pretty exceptional, maybe even better than some of the things we have. So, but they don't have the numbers that they need. Artillery, they don't have enough tanks. But what we do have with our partners is access and basing. We cannot fight from the island America. We have to defend our interests from Europe, from the Middle East, from the Pacific. We cannot do this. We cannot force project to other. To it is cost prohibitive and really impossible for the U.S. to have influence around the world without access and basing. And the reason we have access and basing is because of alliances and partnerships. So there is a theory right now that the Trump administration is going to withdraw the vast majority of about 80,000 troops. That doesn't include families, by the way, in Europe. It's going to be all those troops that have been put on the eastern flank to warn off Russia from attacking NATO, and further reductions in Germany and other places. And then, but that's not just removing the troops and figuring out where to base them here, hugely disruptive to families. It's also about what happens if there is a contingency that we need to. Do we want a scenario in which we are ever in a position where we have to fight to defend Europe, but we have to do a Normandy landing or Operation Torch in North Africa because we've lost all our access and basing in that part of the world? The fact that we're there is a warning to our adversaries and some security and comfort to our friends. We potentially could end up doing the same thing, let's say in Korea or Japan. It is not far-fetched. That's where we are right now, focused on Europe. But I think the dangers of American isolationism is that we are an island and we have no means to really defend ourselves, to perceive the dangers forward. That's where you perceive the dangers forward at the edge, at the frontier, instead of the island, and then where the victims of surprise attack. Like I'm tying in a lot of historical references, like in Pearl Harbor. We were the victims of surprise attacks because we didn't really have the kind of forward presence. We had smaller presence in the Philippines. Anyway, a lot of historical references. We don't want to be a world island. We want to be able to maintain our access and our relationships and not go it alone. It is a dangerous direction that the Trump administration is taking. And it might not have to do that. I mean, America first could mean sweeter deals for the Trump administration. It might be some element of increased transactionalism where there is a financial arrangement, mutually beneficial, where the U.S. invests, for instance, in Ukraine to get access to rare earths. The Ukrainians benefit from that investment. They need to develop their economy. They need to rebuild. So those kinds of deals can unfold in an America First strategy, but we need to be very, very thoughtful and not burn all the bridges that the Trump administration is trying to do as quickly as possible, just in the first month in office.
Hey everyone, it's Ken. I need a quick favor. We are launching Valor Media Network, a new YouTube channel to highlight positive role models who will take on the toxic influencers of the so-called manosphere. Think Joe Rogan. We've got some great hosts already lined up. You'll recognize some of them like Jason Kander, Dan Barkoff, and Bobby Jones. And we've got more coming on board soon. Please click on the link below to Valor Media Network's YouTube page and hit that subscribe button. These early signups make all the difference. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's pretty appalling, but it is in some ways of a piece of America's approach to Russia / the Soviet Union going back a very long time. And I'm wondering if you have a sense, having studied this professionally, but also having been sort of rooted culturally in this antipathy towards Russia. Your family left Ukraine during the Soviet Union. If there's something about America's character or its psychological makeup that leads us to these kinds of appeasements, is it fear? Is it naivete, fear of nukes, naivete of Russia's ability to go back on its word? And, feel free to reference Minsk or 2014. Time and again, we have fallen for it. Why?
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's so many different facets here. One is just a lack of understanding of history, a lack of understanding of the geopolitical environment. For I'd say at the beginning of our relationship with Russia and Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union in late 1991, we didn't necessarily distinguish Russia and Ukraine. We had a lack of understanding that those are two separate countries. We kind of granted it as Ukraine part of Russia's privileged sphere of influence. Russia has been occupying or attempting to wrestle control of Ukraine, different parts of it for 350 years, other parts of it for only 50 or 70 years. So we had a lack of understanding, a lack of cultural understanding. We also, because we have this great American exceptionalism, justified in a lot of ways, we also have an associated hubris. That means that we like to have relationships with other great powers. We prefer to not have relationships with lesser powers. We want them to be, ideally, we want them to be, we want them to be democracies. We want them to share our values. We want them to be good actors. And in the beginning, it seemed like that might be the case with Russia. In the 90s, there was a lot of hope around the fall of the Soviet Union, around Yeltsin, that Russia was going to reform and join the community of nations, be a democracy. And therefore, we could delegate some sort of regional influence, authority to for Russia to run its own backyard. We do this with other countries also. So like this, we don't have to manage 193 relationships. We could manage a much more reasonable handful of great power relationships. We made a huge mistake in thinking that Russia could be a partner in stability, instead of recognizing that Russia had its own revisionist, imperialist aspirations to conquer and dominate its region. I think that's part of the problem. Then there's something else that I point out in a very in a very precise kind of way. We succumbed to hopes and fears, repeatedly, hopes and fears. We thought we could do more with Russia in the 90s. We thought we could do more with Russia in the 2000s, at a point where it became clear that Russia was not going to share our values and was going to be an adversary, be a spoiler, kind of ruin things. And we also succumbed to fears, this basic notion that Russia is the largest country in the world, massive military, massive nuclear stockpile, and that we wanted to avoid a Cold War scenario. So we were very, very flexible. Instead of instituting some conditionality, some condemnation, warning Russia, bracing the countries around Russia, we did that to a certain extent by inviting, let's say, Poland, expanding. We expanded NATO because those countries were pleading with us to provide security to avoid Russian imperialism and aggression. That's why the Baltics and Poland are safe for now, until we demonstrate that the U.S. is not the backbone for NATO. But we didn't extend that to Ukraine. We didn't want to provoke Russia, even though the Ukrainians were pleading for security guarantees in the 90s, when they gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal, 4,000 nuclear weapons, in a pledge to get rid of them in 94. And then into the early 2000s, when they actually
can I clarify something?
Yep.
Didn't we actually provide a security guarantee in exchange for?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels
Yeah.
The received wisdom that I carry is that we have betrayed them by walking out on the security guarantee in exchange for their surrender of the nukes. Is that right?
It was a little bit more, how should I say this, crafty, I guess, on the part of the U.S. and the U.K. that were signatories to the Budapest memorandum. We provided security assurances, which is not the same thing as security guarantees. We explicitly avoided security guarantees because we didn't want to be, committed to defending Ukraine. What we agreed to was to participate in consultations. It'd be Russia, the U.S., Ukraine, and the U.K. Engaging in consultations to figure out how to secure Ukraine against Russia's aggression or something of that nature. So we didn't want to. We explicitly avoided that, perceiving frankly, rightly, that we could be drawn into a direct confrontation with Russia.
But the end result has got to be an awareness of every Ukraine out there, of Taiwan and Poland and the Baltics, that America's not going to be there for you. You need your own nukes.
This is a huge danger. This is, this is the thing that plagues me, is that nuclear extortion works.
Yeah.
That Russia, one of the reasons we were so mealy-mouthed and half-measured in support to Ukraine is because Russia had a nuclear arsenal. If they didn't have a nuclear arsenal, it would be a completely different game. So what does that mean to Iran? North Korea expanding its nuclear arsenal. It's an incentive to do that. It's an incentive for other countries to conduct, clandestine nuclear development programs and achieve a nuclear arsenal so that the U.S. doesn't take action to defend its national security interests. And this is part of the whole story of hopes and fears. And we did this throughout the entire period. This wasn't just Trump. This was George H.W. Bush. Clinton, to a certain extent, was maybe one of the best performers because the U.S. had interests. We wanted Ukraine to denuclearize. We had values that drew us to Ukraine. We wanted Ukraine to be a democratic nation. Bush, too, George W. Bush performed pretty badly, looking into the eyes of Putin, seeing his soul, doubling down on a relationship with Russia, mainly because he wanted a Russian support for the war on terror. Both Bush and Obama kind of turning their backs on Georgia and Russia's first forays into military aggression. The Biden administration performing little better in being a day late and a dollar short with providing aid because, again, Russia was effective in nuclear saber rattling. We wanted it to maybe normalize relationships with Russia. This, again, hopes and fears. And Trump is doing the same thing in the way that he usually behaves, to the greatest excess, doubling down on hopes and fears, and it's going to blow up on our face. And it's going to blow up in a way that I could perceive is going to implicate a larger war in Europe. I've looked at this for years. I wrote about this even before the war started, that the risk of spillover, if we don't do enough, is extremely high. And this is looks like it's going to realize because the Europeans know that that the Kremlin has Europe in its crosshairs. So they're thinking about putting troops into Ukraine. And that is a recipe for a larger war. So it's a dangerous scenario. There are not a lot of answers to this. One of the things I try to do is communicate in a way that may resonate with Trump, as difficult as that is. It's putting on my National Security Council director's hat and say, Trump, you want to be the winner. You don't want Russia to be the winner. What we need to do in this case is we need to make sure that Russia doesn't snap up large portions of Ukraine, believes it scores a win, and then casts its eye further west towards Europe, and trying to see if there's a way to communicate that either to him directly or through his seniors. And you can see that play out right now in the tension within the administration. The national security practitioners are attempting to make this case to him. The isolationists are trying to get him to withdraw and normalize relationships with Russia. I think, unfortunately, that faction is going to win. But for now, the practitioners are still having a voice and some influence. We'll see how long that goes.
What really shocks me is the shift from the practitioners to the isolationists. I mean, people who 2 minutes ago were hawkish on Russia, as soon as they get drawn into Trump's political black hole, they change their tune. I'm thinking about Marco Rubio, right? I mean, he was the one guy that people had some faith in to stand up and do the right thing. But it appears in Munich and beyond that he'll do and say whatever he has to stay in Trump's good graces.
That's true. But there's a difference between the public messaging and staying on sides. and the what's going on behind the scenes and the private counsel.
Good.
And you could absolutely see this. You could see this in the rollback of, the worst comments from Hegseth and Trump about Ukraine giving up its territory, not being a part of NATO, and then just 24 hours later wheeling that back. You could see that still playing out.
Totally.
So,
And amateur hour, by the way, on the part of this administration. I mean, humiliating for them, but reassuring for those of us who wanted
yeah.
to see some sign of pushback.
This happens all the time, though. This will happen all the time. This happened all the time in the Trump administration. He does not want to look weak, but he makes mistakes pretty regularly and wheels them back. Most of the time, it's behind the scenes. Some of the time, it's public. We see that already in the first month playing out. Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, in particular, know the lessons, have studied what happened to, for instance, H.R. McMaster, that made a mistake at MSC, the Munich Security Conference, and seemed to contradict the president, embarrass the president. They're not going to do that. So their criticism is going to be behind the scenes. We'll see some of the same things play out, I think, with the some of the Republican establishment that is concerned about national security. But ultimately, it's not going to. I don't think they'll be able to hold back the worst aspects of Trump and Trumpism. These folks will end up falling by the wayside. We'll see turnovers in the administration. We'll see the Republicans continue to be weak-kneed. It's shocking that every single one of Trump's absolutely atrocious cabinet picks made it through.
Yeah, absolutely shocking. I would have actually put money on most of them going through, but not Tulsi Gabbard. And, she is someone that people in my sphere, myself included, know and have worked with in the past. And the idea that she is the gatekeeper for America's national intelligence is terrifying to me.
Yeah, I would have put money on Patel not making it through, actually. He's probably as bad as some of these other picks are. You could cauterize the wound of a Tulsi Gabbard. The bureaucracy in defense will likely, grind down Hegseth. But Patel is a direct attack on opposition, on free and fair elections, on Trump's opponents. That, to me, is the most dangerous player out there.
Yeah.
So it's, it is going to be a big fight going forward. I think over the course of this, next week and next months, I'll be talking about the domestic and foreign policy implications of the Trump administration. I guess in a sad way, this book couldn't be better timed with the third anniversary and a month into the Trump administration, talking about both the mistakes that we've made, highlighting how Trump is making them bigger than anybody else before him, but also, frankly, casting a vision forward about this idea of neo-idealism, that the U.S. can recapture moral leadership going forward, putting U.S. values as a centerpiece. The whole idea of putting values as a centerpiece is it allows us to look past these bright and shiny objects, both hopes and fears, and look towards the long-term vital U.S. national security interests. This idea that we want stable relationships, economic, political, military alliances. We want to make long-term investments in U.S. security. That could be in securing rare earths. But we can't do that if we are so transactional, short-term, short-sighted like we have been. And that's why values allow us to kind of focus on the big picture and navigate around these things. So that's the part of the conversation that, I want to talk about going forward. We're ways off from the pendulum swing from Trumpism to something beyond, but it's a conversation that we should start having, that we can do this better than we have done thus far.
Couldn't agree more. I have one more question for you. We had a flood come in from audience members. We let them know that we were talking today. And I picked this one out because it gets right to the point. It's about Pete Hegseth. How can U.S. service members speak out against Secretary Hegseth's plans for reshaping the armed forces into his Christian nationalist army of believers without violating the UCMJ? That's the challenge, right? Because You have multiple obligations. Your ultimate one is to the Constitution, but you're also bound by the UCMJ.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is there's actually broader latitude than most people understand. You can't have that kind of political, overtly political kind of commentary in uniform. But you take off the uniform, you're off duty, you could be critical. You wouldn't be violating the UCMJ. The problem is it doesn't make a difference. With this administration, the fact that you're critical, even if you're not violating the UCMJ, means that you're relieved from your positions of authority, you're fired, you're marginalized, even if they don't necessarily force you out of the military. So that's where we are. We're in a lawless environment where there is going to be maximum cost. If we had the fortitude under the previous administration or under the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, where people exercised that kind of latitude when they were challenged, like myself, when I was challenged to defend my values, to uphold the Constitution, I did it. But we were challenged multiple times. People stayed silent, even when they could do that without violating the UCMJ. Now it's harder, but we're going to see some folks exercise some moral courage. Why? Because there are going to be large numbers of people getting fired. I think C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is on the chopping block. General George, the chief of staff of the Army, is on the chopping block. I'd say Lisa Franchetti, the chief of naval operations, is on the chopping block. There are these senior officers are going to be fired. It's just a matter of time. And I think they could either attempt to, take those blows, stay silent, or they could speak up for their values and call bullshit. And I hope that some of them do that. I don't know if they will. Certainly our military leaders have shown both a moral flexibility and a kind of lack of intestinal fortitude in standing up for our democracy, for the Constitution. But this is where it really counts. So we'll see if they stand up.
Indeed, we will. Well, maybe they can take some inspiration from the lieutenant colonels and others who did what they didn't have the courage to do. Thanks, Alex. As always, we're out of time, but let's check in soon. I want an update on how Eugene's doing. I knocked on doors for him, and we'll check in about the progress of the book. And I'm sure we'll be in touch about the next Ukraine trip, which is coming up.
That sounds great. So it's The Folly of Realism. It's out on Tuesday, 2/25/25, the day after the third anniversary. And also you can find me at Substack at avindman.com.
Awesome. We'll put everything in the show notes, Alex. Talk soon.
Thank you.